Software engineering is all about making trade-offs. You can look up the CAP theorem, which is consistency, availability, and partition tolerance. That's a widely talked about thing in the context of scalability and system design. But basically the underlying principle of that is basically you can't have it all when it comes to a system. You can't have a system that perfectly scales, is always available, and you're able to have a perfectly fault tolerant system where if one of the nodes goes down, there's some tolerance in the rest of the system because of that. You can't have everything. You have to make some trade-off. You have to make a trade-off at some point. Whether you choose speed over reliability, or if you choose reliability over speed, and do you choose scalability? Do you choose data consistency? You have to make choices, and sometimes those choices are rather difficult because it comes with a series of trade-offs you have to make. There's a cost to whatever you choose, and you can't have a system that does it all. Some systems make choices on your behalf, and they come with a lot of features, but as a result of that, you may introduce greater latency in your system because maybe the library that you chose requires some kind of acknowledgement on the publication of the message. And so software engineering is basically just this one big game of trade-offs. And I see this not only in system design, but also in terms of your job itself, like how you go about picking the job that you're going to pick. Because just like how systems can't have everything, you also can't get everything you want in a job. There's going to be some kind of trade-off that you're going to have to make. And the most common trade-offs the most common things that I've seen that you'll probably have to negotiate on are obviously salary. But with a high salary, you just have to make sure that there's not some regular like on-call 24/7 thing where your phone's always buzzing after hours. And you want to make sure that your quality of life remains good even if you get a high salary, because sometimes the boring job may be the best job for you, and that's just the way it is sometimes. The boring job where you go in, you sit down at your desk, and you work on one spot in the code, and that's it, and you only do one thing, but the job pays like okay. You don't want to automatically rule that out, because sometimes that is the perfect job for you in whatever stage of life you're at. And honestly, sometimes the boring jobs are the jobs that allow you to learn the most on your own, because you still have a lot of energy after that job. Whereas on the other hand, a job that always is requiring you to put additional hours in, or you're always solving issues during the night or working on weekends, you're going to get burned out. You're going to get burned out in about 6 months out of that job. And usually it's those jobs that have the super high salaries, because everyone's chasing the high salary. But with that is also you're going to have to make some choices. You're going to have to make some sacrifices. Are you willing to sacrifice maybe some of your quality of life temporarily and take the high salary? Or do you always just want to stay, choose a more stable route? Because sometimes those high salary jobs, particularly in startups, are very unstable. You don't know if the next funding round is going to come through. You could log in one morning and your account is deactivated and you got laid off. It happens all the time. And you have to make a choice. Are you willing to take the high salary for 6 months? Or do you want to take the stable route for a lower salary, but probably be guaranteed a little bit better quality of life? Because there's up to a certain point, you will not notice a difference between if you make one number in salary versus another. What you will notice is that your quality of life is going to greatly diminish past a certain point, past a certain threshold beyond which you're willing to work. And burnout is a very real thing. And I feel like burnout is slowly starts to be introduced into your life and you kind of like just can brush it off. You're like, oh, I'm kind of just getting, I'm unable to focus a little bit more. I'm not as motivated to work on projects. But you can brush that off for a few months, but it's like something happens when it gets past a few months. It just whoosh, rises way up. And once it gets way up, you're going to have all kinds of signals. You're going to have it's not even it's not even so much like a lack of motivation. You almost get just kind of jaded and callous to everything. You kind of get into a spot where you just don't really care. And that can go on for a while. I mean years. So you have to be cognizant of that. You have to say to yourself, okay, do I want to take the job that has the very, very high salary? Because some of those are just ridiculous. And do I want to take like ridiculously high? And do I want to take that salary with the possibility that I may, uh, you know, burn out in 6 months? And do I want to live with the repercussions of that? Or would I rather take the stable job, not make as much money up front, but have a better likelihood that I'm going to be in this job for the long run, or at least longer than a year, 6 months to a year, and not introduce burnout into my life. So there's personal trade-offs you have to make with this job too. It's not, all the jobs are not created equal. And some jobs are just very bad. Some jobs are very good, and sometimes it's hard to get a feel for them, especially when you're interviewing. It's also particularly hard to kind of get a gauge for the quality of job if you're just in a scramble to get work because you haven't been able to find work for a while. And that can kind of sometimes you blur the lines between what you see as a good job and a bad job. And unfortunately, I think that we as software developers, I think we have to do a lot of work that's not included in the job description. That's not really, it's not, you wouldn't think that we have to do. A lot of the job is planning, and a lot of the job is trying to convince people that we need to do this in the code, or we need to handle this technical debt. And that can be very taxing mentally. That can be very, because you become the person who always is um, introducing burdens, or introducing things that aren't seen as good things into the schedule. And I think that part of the job can be very taxing. So if you couple that part with a job that's already high stress and you're working a lot of hours, you're going to get burnt out. And that's just the reality. And that's why turnover rates are so high. And people are lasting 1 year, 2 years at jobs. It's because of that problem. And it's because, and I just don't see it improving, because unfortunately, if you leave, somebody can come in and take your spot, and the cycle will continue. And I think that part in and of itself requires us to try to find more quality jobs, and try to look for jobs that have some kind of backup plan in the event that the schedule goes kind of awry, or like the technical debt kind of sneaks up on you that you have to handle, because that time needs to be allocated for every sprint. There needs to be 10% at least, I would say, of time every sprint devoted to truly tackling technical debt, not just putting a band-aid over it. Because let's face it, if we're working in .NET on the channel, so if our engine API has some dependency in our .NET solution that is, we notice a security vulnerability. Let's try to think, maybe a version of Mass Transit we're using is old and it has some kind of vulnerability or something. I'm just making it up. But we have to address that. We have to update that. If we let that persist, then we introduce risk into our system. But that's something that needs to be identified early, because if we wait, if we waited to fix that a couple of years down the road, me trying to come back and fix that in my personal project is going to be a lot harder, compared to if I had handled it in the first few months. Because the more you wait, to update dependencies, it's the level of difficulty increases rapidly, and it becomes that much harder. If you wait, it not only makes it harder to update that dependency, but sometimes dependencies that require the other dependency are going to be a pain, because you have to update those too. And if you have to update those, you might break somewhere else in the code too. So it just becomes this whole mess. And even if you wait a year, it can become very difficult. You really have to stay on top of it, which is why you should really aim as best as you can to have as few dependencies as possible. Now, what you don't want to do either is just make everything from scratch, because that's a huge amount of time. And it's going to be, that knowledge is going to go away with the person who made all the stuff. That's just what happens. But you don't want to add a dependency for every single thing. Like, you can look up one dependency that exists is like checking if a number is odd or even or prime. Those are very common dependencies because they're easy projects. People make them and they push them up to the package managers, and then people can download them. But they get popular. So you don't want to use those. But you don't want to make everything from scratch either. You want to be somewhere in the middle. Somewhere where it makes sense to add a library, but some places where it makes sense to build it yourself. If it's clean, if it's lightweight. In React, you want to keep your package JSON file clean and up to date. You don't want that thing to grow. You don't want that just infinite number of lists and dependencies to grow, because have you ever tried to update an old React version to a new one? Just try. Just try to do it and see no dependencies break. You're going to have so many dependencies break, and trying to go through and update those, it's wild. It's a very difficult experience, more difficult than what it should be, but it's a self-induced problem, right? Because I have a React project for this channel, this engines simulator, and I have some dependencies that are just in there. If I let that just sit there for a while, right? Those things are going to get out of date. Like my GitHub will tell you if there's like a dependency alert because there's a vulnerability found, or if a dependency is out of date. And GitHub automatically suggests to update those. And that's not something that we should just routinely ignore. We should handle those. But again, it's a game of trade-offs, and you have to say to yourself, okay, I'm willing to allow taking some of those a week, and also taking other work that we have to do. And I'm willing to kind of forego updating some of those libraries, because I think that I'll be able to in the future basically slowly roll out the updates. But that's a trade-off, right? Because obviously as developers, we want to update it now, but we have to make a trade-off to say, okay, we'll update some of it and we'll take on this other work. And that's the part of this job that is difficult, is planning. And it's planning to, we have to make the plans. We have to implement the plans. We have to test the plans. We have to deploy the plans. I don't know if I already said that, maybe. I think that's the part that's very taxing, and I just don't know if that's discussed much about the job. But again, you can't have it all. You're never going to be in an environment where you are 100% satisfied. I would say that if you are 75% satisfied with your job, you're in an incredible spot. You should not go anywhere. But if you are 50% or lower satisfied, meaning that half of your job you don't like, half you do, I wouldn't say that that's like a total pull the cord on this one and look for something else. I would say that try first to make the necessary adjustments you can at work. Try to introduce new process changes. Try to spruce up the team, meetings, or introduce new things that make the quality of life better for the developers. And if that doesn't work after a series of a few months, then I would maybe reevaluate. But I would say that, the burden is on you to make it better. And that's just how software engineering is. It's not going to improve by itself because, when you think about your car, or we'll talk about bikes. Bikes are a little simpler. Well, if you think about your bike, you ride your bike into town, you ride your bike up to the coffee shop. If you notice your tire, going a little flat, you can get another month on that thing probably with no issues. It gets a little flatter, you start trickling around like around 10 psi, and you're pretty low. You're pretty low at that point, and you figure you probably could make it into town one more time. And when you get into town, your tire all of a sudden gives out, all the air comes out, and now you're riding on your rim, and you can technically just kind of cruise just with the rubber on the rim like that for a bit if you really need to kind of stagger your way home. But you risk damaging your rim. And then if you damage your rim, you got to replace your rim. So you might have to get your wheel relaced to a new rim. Yeah, it's a whole mess. And it's expensive too. And a system is the exact same way. If we let our dependencies kind of just ride out, we can probably limp along with this old version. At some point, that is going to break, and it's going to happen. It always does. There's going to be something that's unforeseen that breaks it. Whether it's even a browser update can break it. Maybe it's a new it's something with the framework that broke it. It's going to be something, and you have to say to yourself, how long do we want to ride this out? Do we want to ride it out a long time and wait and do the wait and see approach, or are we going to let it get down to 10 psi and then do it? Ride it out as long as we know that we probably can or come close, and then fix it. And that is the difficult part because we have to plan for it. We have to say, okay, we need to fix this in 3 months. We need time for it, otherwise it's going to break. And so I think talking about it is hard because all of a sudden now we have to be like the salesperson for our own system and our own code. So we have to be a salesperson, we have to be a developer, we have to be a DevOps engineer, we have to be a tester, we have to be a sprint planner. There's a lot of roles that are not listed in that that fall under this job. This is why this job is software engineering is falling victim to just ever increasing, we call it scope creep. It's just the burden of responsibility just keeps increasing, and it's been doing it steadily for years and years. But I think finally these past couple of years we're really seeing it just balloon out to just unbelievable list of things. That's why it's so hard to find a job as a junior developer right now, just because the scope of responsibilities is so large, and it makes it so hard to figure out what to start with. And with that, you have to make a trade-off. You have to say, okay, I'm going to learn C# over Java, and I might take a job, or I might get a call back for an interview, and half of their technology is in Python, and you didn't learn that, and now you have to go back, and it's hard because you have to pick. At some point, you have to pick. And if you learn, let's think here. If you learn AWS, but they use Google Cloud, or you know what I mean, then it's like, okay, the principles, but you have to learn something new, and that makes it complicated. And again, it's a game of personal trade-offs. It's a game of professional trade-offs, but and it's a game of system trade-offs. You're never going to have 100% everything that you want, but you got to try to get as close as you can. And that's the hard part about this, and that can be very taxing. And if done incorrectly, it can lead to serious burnout very quickly, very quickly. And once you are burnt out, I've seen reports of people taking years to truly recover, and I feel like there's a temptation there, to say, oh, it can't be that bad. You're sitting at a screen inside, working on your laptop. You're just typing and doing things. When you put it like that, yeah, obviously it sounds fantastic, right? That's like a dream setup, and it is a good job. Don't get me wrong; it's a great job, and there's a lot of perks. But there's a serious thing that needs to be addressed in terms of this burnout, because people are reporting that they once it happens, it takes them years to recover. Years. I mean, it's almost, it almost begs the question, like, why? It makes me think, why? Like, why does it take so long to recover from burning out on software? Why does it take, why do people have to leave their job for months at a time? Because they just can't get back to the spot where they once were. It's curious. I don't know. I really do think, in my opinion, I really do think one of the problems is the increasing scope of responsibilities. I think it's a huge problem. I really do. I think that is going to lead to burnout, and I think that explains why turnover rates tend to be higher now. And I don't know. I really think that we need to stick with specialization, because without specialization, if we're trying to do the one size fits all thing where we're trying to find the super developer who knows everything, I just I don't know if that's sustainable. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure people can know everything and or make it seem like they know everything, but I just don't see how that doesn't lead to burnout. Um, so I don't know. It's an interesting time for sure. We'll see in a few years where this what the trend, where this goes to, but I don't see it improving. I To be honest with you, I see, you know because how many layoffs that we have seen, I just see it getting worse before it gets better, I think. So I think we just got to keep studying, and just keep a kind of a monitor on ourselves, a gauge as to where we are at. Um, and I think the important thing is that if you do need to take time off work, just to fill that gauge back, get your gauge back to full, to make you feel right, then I think it has to be done. Obviously, there's some planning that has to go along with that, in terms of, like, what do you do in the interim time on those months off, right? Um, I don't know, but that's it's something to talk about, something to think about. So, if you all have ever really struggled with burnout, or do struggle with that, let me know, because I think it's definitely a problem. Um, I just don't know how much it's talked about in the professional setting. So, anyway, that's it for today. I'll see you in the next one.